Ever wondered what it's really going to take to reach net zero? What if cities could clean the air instead of polluting it? And could microbes hold the key to repairing the planet? Welcome to Future Now, the brand new climate innovation podcast brought to you by Springwise, the global innovation platform. The next big climate solution is out there, you just might not have heard of it yet. Join myself, Matilda Cox, and Springwise's commissioning editor Matt Hempstead, along with a host of special guests, where we'll be exploring the bold ideas, breakthrough technologies, and big questions shaping a sustainable future. Just search Future Now on your usual podcasting platform and subscribe for a monthly dose of the innovation that matters. Hello and welcome to COP30 Covered, the daily podcast show from Edie, where we're bringing you all the latest news and views from the UN's 2025 Climate Summit in Brazil. Yes, welcome back to COP30 Covered from Edie, hosted in partnership with us, the Springwise team. So this is episode 12 of COP30 Covered from Edie, and you're listening to the voice of Springwise's content editor, Matilda Cox. Joining me in our podcast studio is our commissioning editor, Matthew Hempstead.
Hello, how are you doing?
So we're taking over from the Edie team today. So we're going to be bringing you a special episode on AI and clean tech at the COP, which is meant to wrap up on Friday in Belém. But before we get into why this is the first COP where AI has been on the official thematic agenda, we do have the news in brief to bring you. So we finally have a confirmed COP31 host, Turkey. Australia officially pulled out of the race late on Wednesday, but they'll still offer to host a regional pre-COP event in the hopes of better including the Pacific region in the summit. The European Union has been named the fossil of the day at the COP for not offering any additional new funding and for backsliding on its deforestation and business sustainability reporting directives this year. The award has been presented daily at COPs for the last 16 years, calling out laggard countries. And the COP30 president has told The Guardian that he will not be concerned if the summit doesn't result in additional public finance commitments for the energy transition. He said, "You don't need more money from developed countries, you need to leverage more dollars from each dollar that you have." So this has angered a lot of NGOs who highlight the need for more predictable finance mechanisms than the whims of private investors. So today is officially the last day of the thematic agenda at the COP, and tomorrow all energy will be directed to getting the official agreements finalised. So alongside themes relating to agriculture and food systems, AI and technology are on the agenda today. So AI has obviously been on kind of everyone's agenda, kind of sustainability related and otherwise definitely for the last year. I wonder if you could talk us through why, Matthew.
So AI is definitely being hailed as a solution in many different fields relating to climate action. So that goes from everything from conserving and restoring forests to making buildings more energy efficient and optimising wind farms. I'd also add in as well, there's a lot of industrial processes that could be stand to be optimised by AI as well. But of course, AI, as has been discussed a lot recently, comes with its own environmental impacts. It's a significant and fast-growing user of energy, being set to use as much energy monthly as the whole country of Japan by the end of 2025, which is which puts it into context pretty amazingly. AI also has a significant freshwater impact. So AI's projected water usage could hit 6.6 billion meters cubed by 2027, predominantly for data center cooling. But the good news is that policymakers are increasingly aware of these issues and working to mitigate them, and so are innovators. So the big news in this space at COP is the launch of the Green Digital Action Hub, which took place on Monday, which will act as a kind of central repository for data, expertise and tools to help nations implement green digital strategies. So this hub will be overseen by an international advisory body led by Brazil, with partners including the International Telecommunication Union, the UN Institute for Training and Research, the World Bank, the Global Green Growth Institute, and also the European Green Digital Coalition and the Coalition for Digital Environmental Sustainability. So this is really a big international initiative. I think what's particularly interesting about it is that it's particularly focused on the Global South, where access to technology and climate resources is often limited. So typically the conversation conversation that we see about AI focuses on a small handful of the big US companies, sort of China in the abstract, and Europe's quote-unquote response through companies like Mistral AI, which is a Paris-based developer of large language models. So I think it's good to see that conversation being broadened to include the rest of the world as well, which, as we know, is a big theme in COP in general. Monday's announcement as well, I would point out, also builds on work done at previous COPs. So at COP29, the Declaration on Green Digital Action was signed by 82 countries and nearly 1,800 stakeholders. And the new hub announced that this COP will be the nerve centre of the Green Digital Action Initiative, which was actually first launched by the ITU at COP28. There's also a bigger context here, which I think is interesting when it comes to international action on AI, including on sustainability. So AI now has its own series of summits and international reports, which were actually originally modelled on COP and the IPCC. As a result, we now have the AI Action Summits, which are basically a rebranded version of the AI Safety Summit, which was first held at Bletchley Park in the UK back in the time of Rishi Sunak. Now, Sunak may be long gone, but the AI Summits live on, and this year's iteration was held in Paris in February. And one of the key outcomes of that summit was the creation of the Coalition for Sustainable AI, which is a membership organisation led by France that aims to facilitate collaborative initiatives to align AI development with global sustainability goals. So there's an interesting dynamic emerging here where sustainability initiatives are coming out of the AI Action Summit and AI initiatives are coming out of the COP Summit. So there's even overlap in some of the organisations involved, with the International Telecommunication Union a key player in both. There are some important differences in the mission statements of the two. The new GDA hub is a resource platform and goes beyond just AI, so it has a focus on tracking e-waste, for example. But to the uninitiated, these things obviously seem pretty similar. So I think it'll be interesting to see how all the different work streams that are in the space work together going forward.
Absolutely.
So, of course, we're at Springwise, we talk about innovation. So we're foraying into the world of policy with the ED team this week, but we like to kind of track what's going on in terms of the technology. And on that side, we're seeing a lot of different types of solution to the climate impact of AI. So a lot of the headlines have been on the generation side, with sort of eye-catching headlines about deals to fire up the old 3 Mile Island nuclear plant to power data centres, for example. And we're also seeing tech companies become interested in technologies like enhanced geothermal energy to provide them with the kind of clean, uninterrupted power that they need to power these vast hyperscale facilities. However, this is not the only type of innovation in this space. We're also seeing new, more efficient designs for AI computer chips, for example, as well as novel cooling systems for data centers. We're even seeing, several companies that are working on using waste heat from data centers to heat buildings, homes or other types of buildings. And one thing which I don't think is discussed enough, however, is that there's more than one way to make an AI model. There's been early, very public success with a particular type of data intensive and therefore energy hungry neural network, and this is behind a lot of the current data center boom that we're seeing at the moment. However, with our 2 interviews for this episode, we want to get across the point that there are actually different ways to make AI models. So our 2 great guests are both approaching AI differently and using kind of alternative architectures and techniques to some of the more mainstream ones that we've seen already.
Yeah, absolutely. So for our first interview, Matthew, you sat down with Matt Carr, who's the co-founder and CEO of Luffy AI. So here's that conversation in full now.
Okay, so I'm here with Matt Carr, who is co-founder and CEO of Luffy AI, a UK startup that has developed an AI stack using a technology called neuroplastic AI. Matt, thanks very much for being here with us today. Let's start at the very beginning. What is neuroplastic AI and how is it different to other AI systems people might have come across?
So neuroplastic AI is basically a bio-inspired approach. So basically we know from all real biological systems that these networks are actually neuroplastic. And it gives animals the ability in their sort of brains to sort of tune and adapt to the bodies they're embedded in. So the way I sometimes like to think about this is a bit by analogy, is if you've ever seen a deer being born, a deer can learn to walk within an hour. And the sort of network for the walking structure is actually embedded in the deer's brain, but it's using this sort of mechanism to sort of self-tune its brain effectively to its body, and it's sort of learning things like how much does its body weigh, how long is its arms, sort of self-tuning its brain to its body. And so we've been very inspired by these kinds of techniques, and we're sort of taking these bio-inspired neuroplastic learning rules and looking at how they can be embedded into neural networks to make sort of that same capability, but embedded into industrial and robotic systems. So it would give them the ability to self-tune and self-adapt to the properties of that edge hardware.
Brilliant. I mean, I'm always fascinated by anything that's kind of biomimicry or biomimetic. So we're here during COP at the moment, which is obviously all about decarbonisation. So there are two sides to this when it comes to AI. Let's start with the kind of much discussed issue of AI's climate impact. How big of an issue is AI energy use and emissions in your opinion? Could you put it in a bit of context for us?
Well, yeah, I think it is a big issue because what we're obviously seeing is this trend towards larger and larger models, particularly around language models, but also sort of other areas of AI as well. And there's sort of this trend to try to make an ever more general AI sort of network calculator effectively. And this is just meaning we're seeing an explosion in the energy consumption because for some of these use cases, even though something like ChatGPT is enormously impressive in terms of its, capability, in terms of what you can ask it, the temptation becomes to use it a bit like a Google search and just ask it everything. But then, of course, the energy usage for a neural network or ChatGPT based kind of search ends up being like 1 watt hour or something like this for a simple search, and then almost 20 watt hours for a more complicated search. And this ends up being, at least from public estimates, about 25 times more energy intensive than just a traditional sort of Google search would have been. So what we're seeing is this sort of explosion in the energy usage of these kinds of algorithms. They're obviously very, very powerful, but that's driving a lot of data center adoption. And then also on the other side, the training as well is also very energy intensive. For something like a large model, you might be looking at like 50 gigawatt hours or something like this, something very, very massive. And this just is, leading to an explosion in the demand for sort of compute and energy usage. So that's the sort of environment we find ourselves in, where we're seeing this sort of big demand. But I think that's not really the only part to the story here. I think it's very multifaceted. And just as AI is sort of becoming a new consumer of energy, it also has the potential to create vast energy savings in many traditional use cases. And I think that's the side of the story that's often not talked about enough, actually. So if you look at, for example, the International Energy Agency, their sort of energy and AI report, they highlight both sides to this. They kind of talk about, on one side, we've got this big sort of sort of demand for this energy consumption. But on the other side, actually, there's just tremendous potential to go back across all of our existing industrial base and process industries and look at ways where AI can sort of create optimization and energy savings. And so, McKinsey, I think, estimated the potential impact to be between 2 to 5% in terms of performance improvements, potentially just across manufacturing and process industries. And if you look at that worldwide, I mean, that's just massive. I think the International Energy Agency estimates that that's around 2 to 6% in global energy savings that would be possible through adoption of AI in process industries and energy intensive processes. And I think the economic value of that is $100 billion just in today's processes. So we're talking about something that's not just good for energy efficiency, but actually also good for just good business and competitiveness of our manufacturing.
Yeah. So with your specific AI, just kind of building on that, what are some of the projects that you've done recently that you're particularly proud of? And also maybe you can go, as part of that, go into, what is different from the kind of energy perspective with your model compared to, some of the more generalist ones that you just mentioned.
Yeah, so we really specialize in embedded AI controllers for embedded industrial and robotics equipment. So this means if we're thinking about a drone, for example, is a very nice visual example. Could we embed an AI controller into a drone to sort of self-optimize the rotors and sort of flight control for stability and mass distribution, etc. So we would kind of like target those kinds of applications, but in sort of real world manufacturing environments. We've done some examples in industrial motors with some large motor manufacturers. Unfortunately, I can't really name them on the call. Working as well in some metals, furnaces. But a very nice public example I can share is an example we did in composite molding. And so this is like a thermal molding process for aerospace and automotive, where you sort of mold carbon fiber and use it to make aerospace parts for, F1 cars or helicopters or things like that. And the challenge is you have to sort of put heat into the mold to try and sort of set and form that part optimally. And it's a process that's traditionally very manual. You kind of have to tune it to sort of each mold and sort of changes in the materials and, where you source the material recipes from, changes in the thickness of the mold, etc. So it can be a sort of a challenging system to sort of manually sort of optimize for. But we were working with them on an AI controller that could self-adapt to things like the mold thickness and the material distribution. And the network we ended up making managed to achieve a 10% increase in the energy efficiency of that sort of molding process. So it was a very nice example there. And you could also see sort of other energy savings as well, potentially in the material usage. So yeah, so that's sort of a nice, sort of very clear example. We've been working with a company was called Surface Generation based in the UK, and they in turn work with some bigger sort of aerospace and automotive customers.
Yeah, amazing. So I think one of the arguments that really comes through with your, all your communications in literature is the idea that deep learning, reinforcement learning, which has kind of been the kind of incumbent technology, isn't really well suited to those kind of use cases that you're talking about, which is why you've built Luffy. Is there kind of a broader point here, which is that we've maybe got like a little bit focused on one particular type of neural network that's had early success in some applications, but maybe isn't the best one for every single one? And I suppose the punchline question is diversifying to different types of AI, is that a beneficial thing in terms of the energy footprint overall of implementing AI for all these use cases that you've mentioned?
No, absolutely. So I think, and obviously that's, I guess, one of the founding theses of our company. And I think also some other startups we're sort of seeing, sort of coming into the space. Basically, there's been this, I would almost call it an over consolidation into sort of some very specific data-driven techniques. And it's not really surprising because they're used by the hyperscalers, and those guys tend to operate in very data-rich environments. They obviously have, abundant sources of data from image data, search data, social media data. So it's kind of unsurprising in a way that those techniques have kind of grown to massive prominence and sort of getting a lot of attention. But as we've sort of seen in our company and others have as well, there's no such thing as, really a general purpose AI solution at this point that will serve all of these different needs. Particularly what we tend to see sort of in our case is we work with so many customers where the data is actually a big barrier. It can be very difficult, expensive, to get that data. There's often sort of issues with the data quality, or just it's too expensive to obtain it from testing regimes. We also see examples where, for example, there's compute efficiency issues. So if you're looking at some of these edge applications I mentioned, like molding machines or industrial motors, you can't have a centralized AI approach. You can't have it talking to the cloud, 30 million motors talking to the cloud every sort of couple of milliseconds. It kind of needs to be edge based. It needs to be embedded into the compute that's available on edge devices. And so for that to be possible, we need a broader range of AI techniques. And so we're sort of, I think, seeing a bit of that emerging over the last couple of years, more and more sort of companies and startups realizing, okay, we've got these great family of techniques that works really well in these very big data-rich applications. But now we're also going to need a broader range of AI techniques that we can use for other applications in physical AI, embedded control, also more generative AI techniques. We're now seeing them moving into, for example, sort of part design and optimization of processes. So there's a lot of positive potential, I think, for a broader approach with AI techniques.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's an interesting idea, that the hyperscalers have such privileged access to data that they've built it in a way that, it requires that level of data, and that with some of your applications that you're doing, that data is a lot harder to come by. So you've had to be kind of clever in how you use it, which is interesting. So just to finish off, what's kind of the next roadmap for you with Luffy and in the coming months? And also, I suppose, more broadly, like what would you like to see from the conversation around AI more generally?
So for us personally, we're very excited to be entering the market soon in some industrial motor applications. So we're working a lot with conveyor applications and sort of compressors and pumps and fans. These are the kinds of things that may on the sound of it sound a bit maybe boring, or very kind of standard, but actually there's just so many of them. There's something like 30 million industrial motors sold a year. And a lot of these are being sold with very standard sort of off-the-shelf tuning and calibration techniques. But actually there's vast potential to add AI to these industrial motors that will self-tune, self-optimize, make plug-and-play industrial motors. And this will basically improve the energy efficiency and sort of the ability to use these across, faster commissioning times in these applications. So that's very exciting for us. So we're sort of looking to expand our use cases in that market. And I'm hoping that in the broader sort of market context, we will see more discussion and attention maybe on a more balanced approach to AI than just sort of getting drawn into what, all the big hyperscalers are doing. Because I think there's a bigger story here, particularly around the potential benefits of AI for energy and climate in a much broader sense than just looking at, growing data center demand, et cetera, et cetera.
Brilliant. Well, thanks very much, Matt. I think that's a very good positive note on which to leave it today. So thanks very much for your time.
Thank you.
So that was Luffy AI's Matt Carr, and next up I spoke with James Price, Solutions Engineer at digiLab. So here's that interview for you now.
So hi James, thanks so much for joining. Just to start with, so we hear about it a lot, but in your opinion, how big of an issue is AI energy use and emissions?
Hi, thanks for having me, Matilda. I mean, I think firstly, it's important to say that energy use and emissions is a very important topic, and AI definitely does play a role in that. I think probably the sort of hot topic at the moment is looking at data centers. You see them being built out all in the US, where if people are using your sort of ChatGPT and your LLMs, these queries are going through these data centers and causing a lot of emissions and energy to be output. But I think it's worth noting that everything sort of technological still does have an impact. You know, sending emails also causes emissions. It's just less topical to talk about. But, you know, having said that, I read recently that ChatGPT causes 10 times more sort of emissions than Google. And I think this is partly just because the way the infrastructure is set up means that it's inefficient. You know, not every problem that you're asking needs to be answered with a corpus of the entire internet. So I think there's something to be said for using more lightweight models and tools more appropriate for the task for certain topics. And I would also offer a sort of positive rebuttal. I'm biased. Obviously, I work for an AI company, but I would say that if AI can be used for projects that have positive net environmental gain, then I would say that that's a positive way to look at the technology being used.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what AI is capable of, like it can solve in theory, solve some of the world's biggest issues, but it's kind of using that responsibly. So in terms of the different factors that do influence the overall climate impact of AI, how would you rank them? So is it software design, hardware innovation, deployment models, data center optimization, or is it how we use the technology as the end user?
Again, I'm going to give an answer linking back to my previous one, but I personally believe what the AI is being used for is extremely important. So you could imagine a scenario where things are doubly bad and AI is being used to sort of extract as many minerals from a mine as possible. And perhaps maybe you could argue that making that process more efficient is a good thing, but generally trying to sort of use AI in a way that's detrimental to the environment obviously makes things bad. But the positive spin is in projects such as fusion. If you're using AI for really cutting edge, socially, environmentally, and economically beneficial projects, I think that is super promising, and it's a very well posed technology to do so. So I would say, yeah, the most important thing is how we use it. And in terms of least important, I genuinely think that's a difficult question, right? Because the more efficient you make chips, for example, maybe the more people will just try and cram in and run things on them. So hardware innovation feeds into how you're deploying your models, and that sort of defines your software. So it's quite difficult to disentangle them. But there's clearly a huge need for data center optimization, as we sort of have seen with the construction of these over in America. You know, that's not going to go away. So I think trying to make improvements in all of them is important.
Yeah, absolutely. And something that you've spoken about before is kind of all of these new and exciting mathematical techniques that are being developed that kind of go beyond the norm, the standard kind of neural network architecture. How scalable would you say these techniques are, and how much could they actually help with the AI energy question?
Yeah, great. So I think it depends on what you mean by scalable, whether we're talking about how much data we can use with these methods, or whether it's how many times it needs to be retrained, or whether it's where these models can be used. So it's quite an open question. But if I talk about one of our sort of favorite methods, so Gaussian processes, for those that don't know, Gaussian processes are a sort of a Bayesian mathematical modeling technique, which are lightweight, which means they're super quick to run. they're quick to predict with, which means that they're using up much less compute, and they could even be run locally on a laptop. So with these sorts of models, these don't take data the same way that a gigantic neural network would. But for example, they could be run much more frequently because they're much faster and less computationally intensive, and they can be retrained in an efficient manner. So instead of needing to retrain your whole model, training a neural network is often the most expensive part. You can update your model and only sort of care about the new data points. So you can do it in an efficient way. So it is very scalable. And then if we're talking higher level, I would say scalable across industry and discipline, and scalable across domains. I'd say that some of the techniques that we've been working on are super applicable. So if I give you an example of something we call active learning. So active learning, it recommends where the next best place to sample is. So for example, this could be in a water network. You need to know where the next best place to put your sensor is. Or it could be in nuclear decommissioning. You could say, where's the next best area to sample to make sure my site's not contaminated? So I'd say that across industries, some of the techniques are really scalable. And that's the beautiful thing about some of the maths, is that it can be used in so many different circumstances.
Mm. And you've already touched on this a bit, but what are some of the biggest areas where you see AI as being able to have kind of a massive climate impact?
So I have two more thoughts here, two main thoughts. The first one is in making things more efficient. So if you're using optimization algorithms that can trim the journey time, for example, of a shipping container or a plane, or it can make a machine more efficient by 5%. If you look at the sort of classically most polluting industries, if you're making percentage savings on those, then you're having a huge amount of efficiency savings. So if I give the example of shipping, you can use machine learning to recommend where best travel, sort of the quickest path that you can take. So this could have a really, really broad impact starting from today. And then the second one is more future focused. And this is the idea of machine learning and AI being used for new work. So when you're thinking about designing the energy systems of tomorrow, whether it be fusion or SMRs, using AI to really help guide those decisions and make that a sooner reality, make it a possible reality, I think that's a really exciting field and one that we care a lot about.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many different things out there that AI could be used for and is already being used for. And bringing us back to COP, in terms of the potential of AI, one of the tensions that kind of always arises out of COP is that there's this huge imbalance between the global north and the global south. So how can we make sure that, all of these amazing solutions we're talking about and the climate benefits of AI aren't just reserved for kind of richer nations?
Yeah. Obviously, it's a difficult question, right? But I think that the general picture is that it has been the global north that has caused a lot of the sort of climate issues, which have then been felt by the global south. And in terms of the R&D and AI use, I see that happening largely in the global north to partly undo the problem that has been sort of caused by us in the first place. So I think the collaboration is a global effort. It's going to take a lot of international relations and politics and people working together for communal goods. So AI can help with that in the sense that if the global north is becoming, as we said in the previous question, helping things be more efficient or creating new technologies, that there's an answer to be had about making sure that those technologies are being distributed globally in a sort of efficient and fair manner. And then the sort of second niche answer I'd give, and this is less climate focused and perhaps a bit more localized, is AI education is going to be important, because in order for people to use these technologies in the global south. There needs to be a good amount of sort of knowledge in order to make the most out of them. And if I give an example of traffic management, so a lot of areas in the global south use transport techniques which are sort of highly polluting, and it has quite severe social impact. If you can design a city's infrastructure to make it more efficient so that there's less traffic jams, people are spending less time breathing in that sort of dirty air. I understand that's not necessarily a climate issue, but more of a localized pollution issue. I think using AI for a problem like that could have a real impact today on global south countries. So yeah, development economics is something that I'm really interested in and passionate about, and it would be wrong of me to say that there is a clear answer. You know, as I said before, that these issues are really intertwined. So you can't detach healthcare from education and this sort of thing. But yeah, keeping the general principles of trying to do the right thing, taking responsibility in the global north, trying to use AI for good are broad strokes, which I think will help move us in the right direction.
Yeah, definitely. And kind of honing in now on digiLab, I'm sure there's lots of projects that you can name, but is there kind of one or two in particular that you guys have been working on that related to climate that you're particularly proud of?
Yeah, so the one that actually springs to my mind, have you seen Attenborough's Ocean, Matilda?
I have, yes. Yeah.
Yeah, so I watched this the other week, and you know, it's really quite moving and inspirational, talking about how preserving coral reefs is really quite vital to maintaining them as a sort of a stabilizer of the climate. And I hadn't fully appreciated that, but it made me feel really quite proud, because one of digiLab's projects is based over in Saudi Arabia with KAUST. We're using machine learning to help support the world's largest coral reef restoration program. So I think that's just a really sort of like niche and beautiful way of applying AI that perhaps people don't think about as much. Perhaps it's more energy systems focused, or as I said about shipping, but actually, you know, we're taking images of corals and predicting how healthy they are and how they're going to grow and how well they're going to do. So that's one that I'm really proud of. And then to give another honourable mention, I would have to say Fusion. It's one of our key markets at digiLab, and Fusion potentially could deliver clean, almost sort of limitless energy to the world in the near future. That's a dream that we believe in, and one that we think AI can help realise. So those are two really exciting ones that are close to my heart.
I mean, two kind of really, really different applications, but just shows kind of the potential of AI. Yeah, it's two, obviously.
Yeah, it's exactly this.
Yeah, very, very valuable, but very different projects. Oh, well, thanks. I mean, it's a huge topic, so thank you very much for kind of being able to dispel that in just a few minutes. So thank you so much for taking the time to join the call.
Thank you for having me, Matilda. It's been really enjoyable.
Thanks once again to Matt and James for their time. So that's almost everything for today, and we'll be handing back to Team Edie for the final episode of this series, which won't be published until the final COP outcomes have been decided. So it's anyone's guess when that could be, but the team want to be able to explain everything in full. In the meantime, you can check out all of our content at springwise.com, including some of the innovations that Matt mentioned earlier. And you can find all of Edie's COP coverage, including in-depth daily roundups, on edie.net. But for now, it's goodbye from Matthew.
Oh, goodbye. Auf Wiedersehen.
And goodbye from me. Goodbye.